So right now I'm director of a company called TetraLogical that I started because I care about accessibility and accessible user experience. I've spent most of the past 20 years working in accessibility and a few more years than that on the web in general. And now as a blind person, I have a vested interest in accessibility. So that's not what got me into the subject in the first place, strangely. But what I really care about most of all now is giving teams the knowledge and capability that they need to make accessibility happen. I've spent many years working for different agencies, supplying accessibility services, and that's great. It's, you know, it's a useful business to be in. But actually, I now think that the future lies not with agencies constantly being there to fight a rearguard action, but to educate and empower as many people as we possibly can, right the way up and down, left and right, through all the roles in a production team, all the roles in an organization, so that everybody understands they've got a responsibility to do accessibility, and more importantly, the knowledge and the capability to actually do something about that.
How do you personally go about explaining the importance of online accessibility to someone who'd never considered it?
That's an interesting one. One of the most effective ways, actually, in recent years has been to ask them if they use some kind of home assistant, Echo or Google Home or such. And many people, of course, now have. And then the next thing I ask them is, how many times have you had a screaming match with it because it just didn't do what you wanted it to do? It just didn't listen to you. It answered the wrong question. It started the wrong activity. And the answer comes back almost invariably, yeah, I've had that situation. And I'm like, well, that's actually what using technology is like for a lot of people who have accessibility needs or disabilities, myself included as a screen reader user. We get to the point where we think we should be able to do something and it should be reasonably straightforward and possible to do. And we find we're just hitting these kind of frustrating bumps in the road. The analogy kind of parts company with accessibility at that point, because where frustrating conversations with things like Alexa or Hey Google come more because of a limitation of the technology. In accessibility terms, it's often a limitation in the way things have been built and constructed. But having got someone to that kind of recognition of, oh, hell, is that what the experience is like? You can kind of then move the conversation into, so there are design choices as people responsible for creating, building products and services. There are choices that we have a responsibility to make in the right direction. And from there, the conversation, usually heads in the right direction. People get curious. Okay, so, what is it that makes the experience frustrating for you, or for someone who has dyslexia, or name your condition. And what I more often than not find is that people are genuinely quite curious about how to do what they do better. We all make products and services for people to use. So at the end of the day, people genuinely want to find out, actually, if there's something I can do that means more people can use it, more people can enjoy or be satisfied using it. There's definitely a curiosity out there. So that's how I approach that conversation these days.
How do you think the internet will change over the next 10 years? And what specific features or habits that exist now do you hope will be seen as from their time?
My answers to the two parts of it are in almost direct conflict with each other. I suspect that we will see more and more move on the internet away from people who learn their craft by hand, if you like. We've already seen it, of course, the huge rise of JavaScript frameworks and libraries for rapid and effective development. And those are all good things. But what it's meant is that people are now able to walk into jobs where they've got those design responsibilities, development responsibilities, without really understanding the impact that the tools they're using have on users. So I suspect we are going to see more and more of that, where the systems get more complex, and so developers in particular get more and more removed from the kind of the nuts and bolts of the craft of actually writing HTML and even JavaScript, and understanding the implications of the choices that they make. So if we look back in 10 years, the one thing I would love to see being, quote, of its time, is that we recognize that fact, and that we somehow swing the pendulum back somewhere a bit towards the middle. I'm not suggesting for a minute that we stop using all those tools that make development so much easier and quicker and more efficient, especially for people working in agencies or development teams. We've all got deadlines, we've all got pressures, and we want to hit them, and those tools certainly help us to do that. But I think what we've got to swing back towards more of an understanding is what is the impact? What are those tools actually spitting out that gets as far as the user in the browser, and really getting to the point where developers have a better understanding of, sure, my JavaScript's going to output this HTML, but how good is the HTML, and actually why is that important anyway? As I say, I have no idea if those two things can be mutually compatible. I have a horrible suspicion, probably not. But yeah, that's where I think we're going. And if I could choose one thing that we look back on and recognize that we're not doing right, it's really that we're moving away from that innate understanding of the code that we're creating.
If you're with somebody who needs to check how accessible their website is, but only has 5 minutes, talk us through how you go about showing them.
So the kicker there is 5 minutes. The reason I'm laughing is because my team at TetraLogical recently produced a series of 10 quick accessibility test videos precisely to answer this. Unfortunately, they take about 10 minutes to get through, not 5. So I guess my answer has to be choose 5 and then wait and choose another 5. No. But you're right, accessibility can often seem very scary, very big, very overwhelming. And it's nice to have a kind of stepping stone that lets you start making a difference quickly and easily, really lowering that kind of barrier to entry. And so these tests, they're a minute or so long each, and they cover just some basic things like testing for zoom, testing with keyboard, testing for things like linked text, just some really straightforward bits of accessibility. But actually, if you round them all up together and you kind of have a think about the number of people that are impacted if you start testing for those things and fixing things if you find issues, you start to have a really big impact on quite a large number of people. So bite-sized pieces that in and of themselves maybe take you a minute or so to watch a video, and then a few attempts to get it right, so you don't need to go back and watch the video again, and suddenly you find something that's just second nature. Then you go and you do another one, and even if you just take 5 minutes and watch 5 videos, that's 5 things you're going to be doing better than you were 10 minutes before you started watching.
In terms of the adoption of accessible digital products, what do you think is the biggest challenge?
I think historically, actually, accessibility people have been a big part of the problem. And I say this, with full disclosure, as having been one of them back, going 10 or 15 years ago. We spent a lot of time running around telling everybody how terrible a job they were doing. You can't design this, and you're coding that wrong, and you're not doing this properly. And oh, by the way, you're probably going to get sued. And I think the result of a fairly sustained effort of doing that sort of thing kind of made everybody think about accessibility as a big burden, something that had to be shouldered. So I think that's certainly part of the cause of why adoption of accessibility has perhaps not achieved what we'd like it to. I think another big part of the problem is that we're not educating, people learning the craft of user research, design, development, in how to do things accessibly. I did a computer science degree 20 years ago, started after I lost my sight, and there was a module on how to do accessibility, and that was it. Every other code example I came across, whether it was JavaScript, HTML, or something like Java that was outputting an interface of some kind, none of it was accessible by design. None of it mentioned accessibility. It's just basic garden variety good practice, and I don't think that's changed materially in the intervening years. So we're churning out people who are doing online tutorials, online courses, going to college, even going to university, who just aren't being confronted with the basic idea that good design and development is accessible design and development. It's always taught as an afterthought, a separate module. And so they come into the workplace, back to that idea of deadlines. You've got to get this done. We've got to launch. We've got to push, 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 go, go, go. And so there isn't time to actually, do that bolt on, that extra step, because they weren't taught how to make it an integral part of what they do every day. So I think if we can fix the attitude, which admittedly we've done a lot, in recent years to change that, there's a much greater excitement and vibrancy around the idea of accessibility in recent years than there was going back some. but that and the education. So we make it clear as a profession that accessibility is something that we should take professional pride in, and we give people, you know, the education they need to actually realize that in their day-to-day jobs.
What is just the one thing that, or what is one thing out of many that that every single person can do or learn to play a part in the progression towards an accessible internet?
When you're talking to friends, peers, colleagues, anybody who will listen, give the impression that to you, accessibility is just part of what you do. The more we can let everybody around us know that as individuals, we just think it's something that is an essential component of the jobs that we do, the more we sell this idea that it's not extraordinary, it's not unusual, it's just something I do because, you know, I'm good at my job. I think that's probably the biggest thing we can do. It undermines the idea that it's this, you know, thing that can be dropped because we're pushing for launch and we haven't got time. It, you know, it undermines this idea that it's really not that important. And, you know, people with disabilities don't really use technology anyway, do they? You know, all of those things, the more we collectively just actually hold our heads up high and say, you know what, this thing is real, it's important, it's a thing I do because I believe it's part of doing my job and it's part of doing the right thing. And that's infectious. I think people, you know, will talk to you and they will see this attitude and then think, okay, that person knows something I don't know. Perhaps I should go and figure it out and maybe learn something about this accessibility myself. And so it goes on. And the more we can kind of, you know, spread that infectious positive attitude, I think that's how we'll start to make changes.